Hi guys, my name is Lindy and today I'm going to be talking about the book The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. I was anticipating this book ever since high school when I was first introduced to it in class, but I never read it. So when I found it at Goodwill for $1, I was really excited. But this book fell short of its potential in too many ways. A quick synopsis of this book is that it is narrated by 15-year-old Christopher, who has autism, and it is about his quest to find out who killed his neighbor's dog, but in his quest he finds out much more than he anticipated. So there were four main things that I really didn't like about this book. One was that it was told in an overly convoluted way. Two, it was told in first person by the weakest character. Three, the descriptions of the character were inconsistent. And four, Mark Haddon just tried to wrap up his book really quickly in the last paragraph, and he was trying to take credit for something that he didn't do in his story. So one, it was overly convoluted, and what I mean by this is it was told by Christopher, who has autism, and so he would constantly interrupt his storytelling in order to talk about math equations or different descriptions and altogether meaningless things that really had nothing to do with the story and really didn't offer anything. I didn't hate the fact that Christopher went on tangents just because they were tangents, but I hated the fact that Haddon just seemed to be throwing them in without any regard to really why he was throwing them in. I felt like if he had done it in a different way, it could have been really beneficial and been really interesting, but instead it made me really bored and want to skip through so much of the stuff because it really was just useless. I didn't, but I felt like after I had read a whole freaking page of his tangents, I could have just skipped over that. It had nothing to do anything for the story. Two was the fact that it was told in first person and he chose Christopher to tell it in the first person, which really bothered me because Christopher, because he has autism, in the story he is completely unable to emote any empathy towards any other person, which is fine that that's his character and that Mark Haddon wants to shed light on people with autism that have characteristics like that. But it really frustrated me because it did nothing to really help his story, and it could have been a much better book had he gone into third person, because we would have had a much more in-depth look at all of the characters. We would have been, as readers, able to connect to the characters and the story much better had he told it through a third person narration rather than first person. And then three, the character descriptions were inconsistent. So what I really didn't like was that Christopher went on about how he hates fictional stories, blah blah blah, they're fake, so they're not real and they have nothing to help his life. He benefits nothing from them. But then he goes on to explain and compare his life to several fictional characters and stories. So I just thought that was really weird that Haddon wanted to throw it in there, how much Christopher hates storytelling, but he's still comparing himself to different fictional stories. But this could have been, it might have been to serve some sort of purpose, because we did learn early on from one of the tangents that was beneficial, the very few that were, that Christopher, he said that he never lies and that he always knows what he's doing. And then from a tangent we realized this isn't true at all. So maybe that served a purpose, but it really didn't seem to me. And then four, Mark Haddon just tried to tie it up at the end and make this book seem like it was sort of coming up to age, learning how to be independent for Christopher, and he didn't show that at all. So yes, Christopher's character ended up going to London on his own, which was a complete new adventure, something he had never done before, but other than that, there was no character growth development for Christopher. So I thought Haddon could have actually showed this in a number of ways. In one of his tangents about math, Christopher could have been trying to understand people better and maybe have equated to some math formula, which I very well think he could have done. But Christopher didn't try to understand people at all. He didn't grow in any sort of understanding, and Christopher is very intelligent. So I think that he could have noticed that he doesn't understand people and started to try to figure out how he could better understand people to help himself. But he didn't do that. And in the end, Mark Haddon still just summed it up as, oh my gosh, I can go to uni because I went to London on my own and blah blah blah. It made it seem like Christopher was capable of independence where Christopher really wasn't. So that really infuriated me because to me it felt like he was taking credit for something that he completely missed the mark on in telling his story. But with that being said, there was one thing that I really did appreciate about this book, and it was the fact that Haddon, in a way, left the dog's murderer open for interpretation. Now, this is going to be a spoiler alert, so if you don't want to know, leave. If you don't care, stay. Come back after if you read it, if you want. But anyway, spoiler alert. What I mean by he left it open for interpretation is yes, the dad admitted that he killed the dog, but to me this just isn't true. And I know this because the dad was so willing to lie to Christopher to protect Christopher from himself. So we know that Christopher gets angry and violent, and we know that when he gets violent, he blacks out. And we know that Christopher was the only one on the lawn with the dog, and he had blacked out completely until the moment that he woke up in a sense and realized the dog was dead with a garden fork stuck in its neck. So I can conclude very well that Christopher killed the dog. And to lead off of this, I really don't think the dad was as bad as most of the reviews that I've seen of him were. I think he was a much more complex character than people give him credit for, because yes, the dad lied about Christopher's mother's dying once she left him, but I don't think it was for a totally selfish reason. I think that he lied because he was protecting Christopher from himself again. So Christopher had hurt his mom, broken her toes, and then that's why she was in the hospital. But he had completely forgotten this because he had blacked out, and Christopher's dad had told him that something was wrong with her brain, and that's why she was gone away in the hospital. Christopher's kept questioning him about this days later, and later on in the story we realize that Christopher's mom had left the dad and Christopher after that, and then the dad told Christopher that she had died. And I think this was again to just protect Christopher from himself, because the dad, being an adult, knows that the mom left, ultimately because of the pressures that resulted from having Christopher being her child. He probably figured she wouldn't come back, so it was fine, and he lied to Christopher just because it was easier to understand for Christopher that she wasn't coming back because she was dead, rather than she wasn't coming back because you keep hurting her and you're almost impossible to deal with. And then he hid her letters after that because it would have only further confused Christopher of why he lied and this and that, blah, blah, blah. So I really do think that the dad was just protecting Christopher from himself. So I didn't hate the dad. The dad was the only character I liked, because the dad was the only character who showed a bit of complexity and the only character who seemed to empathize with anyone, and he especially empathized with Christopher, which I thought was awesome. But with that being said, I really didn't like the execution. I really didn't like Haddon's execution of this book, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day.